I started my practice because my kids were getting sick. Then when we got to New Zealand, the way we build buildings doesn't really consider how they're going to feel and perform for the people living in them. So a building consented building is very likely not going to be comfortable to live in. Yeah, when the kids got getting sick, it's like these buildings are not performing. They are not.
And lots of other people have had a similar experience. Clearly,
question.
that's gone all the way up to Parliament to try and solve. What do you think of the healthy home standards? What's the unintended consequence in 10 years' time as a result of the current legislation?
We're already seeing it. 40% of our houses are mouldy already. And this is existing buildings and new buildings.
And the healthy home standards are not going to make that better.
We have the highest levels of respiratory disease in the developed world in New Zealand because of the quality of our buildings. An interesting fact is in the Building Act, it sets out definitions. And for adequate, it says adequate means adequate to achieve the aims of the building code.
Oh, wow.
So it's like a circular reference, which is just crazy.
I gotta say, I'm loving it when I meet people who have seen the episodes and tell me that they've loved it, they've enjoyed it, nice work, all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because I jump on and look, and there might be like one or two comments.
Yeah, exactly.
If we're lucky.
Exactly. And that's what baffles me a lot because in person where I'm getting really positive feedback, hey, we've seen your episode, hey, we've seen that you guys got this guest and that guest, and we're like, oh, cool, where did you watch it or where did you hear it? And they're like, oh, we heard it on Spotify or watched it on YouTube. Great, subscribe. So that way we know that you're engaged into the content that we're creating. The subscription also helps us to know our audience, and that way, and if you're commenting and engaging on the digital platforms, it helps us to aggregate that pieces of insights, and then we can ask better questions to our guests, right? We can have more guests coming in. What type of guests do you like? What type of content do you want us to investigate more in? So that'd be amazing if we can get that sort of interaction with our audience online. Fantastic.
This has cost you nothing and it's helped us immensely. Please like and subscribe. Now, let's get into the next episode.
Welcome to Home Run. On this episode, we're with Joe. Joe's director at WEL Architecture. We've been having a little bit of a chat, but Joe, can you sum it up for us? What exactly do you do?
What do I do? Lots, I suppose. So yeah, I'm an architect. I run my own practice, WEL Architecture. My kids are called William, Emily and Lily, so that worked out quite well with the name. I also, I'm the board chair of the Passive House Institute in New Zealand, which is a building standard around kind of comfort and health outcomes and energy efficiency as well. I also I work with the New Zealand Green Building Council around Homestar, so I teach energy modelling. I do lectures at uni. I've got an amazing wife called Sarah, so I'm a husband to her, and I've got 3 wonderful nightmare children who I love very much.
Which came first, the kids or the architecture practice?
The kids.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So it was.
I was wondering if you had this and you strategically named
people asked that. Yeah. No, I was driving down from the Bay of Islands one time, and essentially we got to New Zealand in 2016, and I worked for the same company since we got there, basically until just over a year ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, a couple of years ago, I was kind of in the process of what do I want to do? I'd kind of begun realizing there's other threads I wanted to tug and a different sort of direction I wanted my career to go. And I was driving down going, what could I call it if I did it? What could I call it? Thinking the kids, Lou, woo, well. Beautiful. Let's do that then.
Whilst they were screaming in the back.
No, that was on my own, thankfully. Yeah. Otherwise it might have been something different.
Exactly.
Oh, fantastic.
Other threads.
Health and comfort. So I started my practice because my kids were getting sick, basically, which is kind of why they ended up having, becoming the name of it. We were living in a lovely little place in Murray's Bay on the North Shore, 4 minutes walk from the beach. It was just, after growing up in the Yorkshire Dales and then living in London for 10 years, being close to a beautiful beach was pretty flipping special. But it was just a normal, and I hate to say normal, but a standard sort of New Zealand home. So it got down to 10 degrees inside in winter with a heater in the same room. And in summer, it got over 35 easily, even with all the windows open and fans and all sorts of things. And yeah, the kids were just getting really sick. And, those hacking coughs at night when you're lying there and you can hear it, and started on inhalers and all sorts of things. And so I kind of I studied architecture in London and worked there for over a decade, doing residential extensions primarily, but also working on libraries and film schools in Russia and botanic gardens in China and, all these amazing flipping things. But people were always my focus, and being able to help somebody renovate a little Georgian terrace and create more space and storage and a better way of living for them was kind of my biggest joy, I suppose. And in the UK, kind of learnt about kind of how buildings should perform. And when I mean perform, I mean kind of how they should feel to live in, around temperature and, airflow and all these sorts of bits and pieces, which help the building survive, but also the people have a better life inside them, sort of thing. Then when we got to New Zealand, we build things differently here to the UK, and there are different priorities, namely keeping water out of the buildings. But the way we build buildings doesn't really consider how they're going to feel and perform for the people living in them. Basically,
the building code,
yes,
you'd think, has been put in place to do that, and a combination of the code and healthy homes. Clearly, governments have tried to address that, although you've got to think with the 91 Act and the original, they clearly didn't even keep water out. So, and I remember my trip, my very first time going to Europe and then coming back, I was struck by how kind of flimsy New Zealand houses felt and looked from the solid behemoths and ancient sort of stuff comparatively. Yes. So maybe I'll stop talking about my experience and just ask you, like, coming from your background and then seeing what it was like and then experiencing it, what is the contrast, to sum it up?
It's a very, very good point and question.
Hey, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Quick interruption and request. Please like and subscribe, and don't be too Kiwi about it. If there's a question you've asked or if we've done something silly, let us know in the comments and share it with a friend. Now back to the content.
And a lot of my clients are people that have been abroad, because you don't really know what you don't know or what you haven't experienced and what a home can feel like to live in. So the Building Act, so the legislation is pretty good. Actually, in the Building Act, it says things like no surface should be cold enough for condensation to form. Buildings should be at healthy temperatures. Sufficient air should be provided. So these things that make a lot of sense to make sure that you're going to be healthy and comfortable inside your building. But the way we set out to achieve those very often do not achieve those aims at all. And a lot of it is around achieving compliance. So kind of a tick box rather than performance. And compliance and performance are kind of two different things. So the way we assess compliance of buildings around thermal performance, for example, is saying, yes, we are hitting these R values. Tick, great. But it doesn't look at the orientation of the building. It doesn't look at any shading. So how, if you're getting a lot of free heat from the sun, that's great, because you don't need to add heat into the building, but also you might be overheating in summer. So a lot of our compliance pathways aren't about how it's going to perform. So a consented building is very likely not going to be comfortable living a lot of the time, because they're kind of two different things that we're looking at, basically, which is crazy.
Moved into a brand new apartment and that thing, the ventilation system, because you couldn't open the windows, was nowhere near adequate enough to cool that thing down. And it was north facing, which is great in winter, but in summer it baked.
Boiling, one of my favourite and interesting fact is in the Building Act, it sets out definitions. And for adequate, it says adequate means adequate to achieve the aims of the building code.
Oh, wow.
So it's like a circular reference, which is just crazy. So a lot of other building codes around the world set out kind of performance standards. So our building code has no requirements to assess overheating. There's nothing in there that says you have to consider overheating in your design. One of the interior environment code clause is only applicable to old people's homes and childcare centres.
Wow.
So they're the only ones that require heating under the building code.
So, so let's tack us. Let's go. If you had the power to wave a wand over that thing, what should be improved?
I would change it to performance-based metrics and outcomes.
You talked compliance versus performance, and I think I basically got a grasp of it, but can you be a little clearer in terms of what performance means in your mind?
So performance means how the building will perform from an environment, temperature, moisture control perspective. And they are things we can put numbers on. So you can say, this is how much energy I need to add in winter to keep this building at 20 degrees. Excuse me. This is how much energy I need to cool that building. You can actually measure it to see how much, and you can measure it in design. So all my work, I model buildings. And that means I am assessing the buildings I'm designing and the spaces I'm designing to see whether they're going to overheat or not. And if they are, I can say, what am I going to do to stop that? So it's kind of feeding back into how you're actually designing the building for the people living in it, not to tick a box saying, yes, I've put R6.6 in the roof and I've done this.
One looks at the material and the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, it's a kind of I don't have a good sort of comparison to make, I suppose. But one of them is just saying I'm ticking these boxes.
So what are the key things that you actually measure then? And is this part of the difference of, and please, because I know I'm going to get this wrong and perhaps other people
Absolutely
do.
Fine.
What's the difference between a passive home and something that the Passive House Institute, goes and stamps?
So when we're talking about building performance, I mean, you need a building to be facing the right direction. You need a building to have open. And what I mean by that is,
facing, but what does it mean?
So depending on the site, depending on the place on the planet, depending on the context. So having it north facing is great because you get the high level sun, but obviously an overhang will stop too much overheating in summer, all sorts of things. Crossflow ventilation, making the most of the site and the context is absolutely key. But a lot of that can be based on assumptions. And in a changing climate, in a world that relies on the weather and people, you can't rely on those things, basically. So what the Passive House process or the Passive House certification says, right, okay, we still need to kind of, it's not an excuse for bad design. You still need to think about good design principles, but we're going to check those. And the way we check them is by producing what's called an energy model, which is basically a big spreadsheet essentially, and you put in the actual climate based on the closest climate station. So it's anywhere in the world. There's Passive House in Antarctica, it's Passive House in Dubai. It's completely site specific, and it enables you to say, right, if I use this amount of insulation, these size windows, this glass, this ventilation system, this is how this building will perform. And when I say perform, it'll tell you how much energy you need to run it to keep it at a comfortable temperature, basically. Then you can say, right, I'm going to need too much energy to heat it, so I need to add some insulation, or it's going to overheat too much, so I need to add some overhangs. And it allows you to kind of refine and tailor your design to make sure that the outcomes that the people that are going to live in it are actually going to be achieved. And this is in design. This is before it's even got to site. Whereas kind of the traditional way of designing buildings is design it with the best intentions and let's see what happens. Clients are kind of crash test dummies a lot of the time, and you don't really know how it's going to perform until it's built, and that's a big problem. And that's why we've got a lot of the problems.
I've got to say, as a consumer, if I'm looking at a section and thinking about building there, I'm going, well, I've got a beautiful view to the south, but I know I've got sun to the north. How do we make the most of the view in the sun? But that's probably about as far as I've gone thinking.
Yeah, I mean, our house is, so we built our own house to test this, basically, because I think it's really important to make sure that if you're putting people in something, you need to make sure that it's going to work, basically. So I kind of, as I said, kind of went through this process of having the kids getting sick, learning about all of Passive House and measurable building performance. Thought, right, we better build one then. So we went through the whole process of building it on a very, very tight budget. I finished it in May 21. It cost about the same as a building code building at the time. Right. So because we kind of prioritized the performance up front, it meant it wasn't an add-on that added cost. It was just part of the budget from the start, sort of thing. We've then been monitoring that for the past 3 or 4 years, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. Like I'm shocked at how close it got it, basically.
To the modelling.
To the modelling, yeah, basically. So it just works. And I'm like, why wouldn't everyone do this? And within about 4 weeks of moving in, the kids didn't need inhalers anymore, and they haven't used them since.
I was just going to ask. That's what I was wondering.
It just works. They're at school and daycare, so they bring plagues back every flipping week in winter, but they get over it in a few days.
Yeah.
It used to be a month. when they used to bring things back. We dry our washing inside all winter because there's a constant ventilation system, and they dry overnight. So we don't have to use a dryer.
Is it a powered ventilation system?
Yeah. So you still need to have open all windows. They're really important for comfort, and because I want to be able to control my environment. But you need a minimum level of certain things, basically. And one of those is fresh air. As we breathe out carbon dioxide. We produce all of this stuff in spaces. And, if you buy a new sofa, that nice new sofa smell, that's kind of off-gassing of materials and all sorts of things. And if we're not removing all this stuff, that can have real implications for us, but the building as well, basically. So we need to ensure that we are achieving a minimum level of air change. So if you're trying to rely on openable windows on their own, you're relying on, first of all, people to do it. If you're at work all day, you can't do that because you're not there. And you can't really leave a window open in most circumstances because of security and all sorts of things. So then you're also relying on the weather. But if, in summer when we were in our old house, we have all the windows open and we had fans moving air, but it was just pulling in warm air. So it's not actually achieving the outcomes of what ventilation should be. So what we really need is constant ventilation. So that is a fan working all the time at a very, very low rate. And that exchanges the air once every 3 hours. So 0.35 air changes an hour is what we need as a minimum.
Right.
That just does it all the time. That doesn't stop you opening your doors and windows. I mean, we live with our doors and windows open all summer sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just making sure we're achieving that minimum is what it's doing, basically.
And is that what's keeping the temperature at a nominal?
It helps quite a lot. Yes, because you're. But if you think about in summer, if you're bringing in air at external temperature, then it might not help as much. So then we've got to think about orientation. You've got to think about the type of glass you use in your windows. Does it have a low E coating? You've got to think about shading, overhangs, design decisions, all sorts of things.
So two things: low E coating, and then also I had the perhaps mistaken perspective that a passive house was something that didn't require energy to heat or cool.
It requires significantly less. So I do lots of modelling for existing buildings for other designers as well as part of my company. So we do kind of consulting for the architects, and most buildings that comply with the building code need about 120 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year of energy to keep the building at 20 degrees. Passive house requires 15.
Wow.
Basically. So it's significantly less. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the ones I design are kind of sort of 10, 11, 12 because of the process I use. Right. So it uses significantly less. Around passive, that's more to do with you do not need to do anything. The building does it for you. So the ventilation is running all the time, so you don't have to open the windows. You still can. There's nothing stopping you doing that. The envelope, and when I say the envelope, I mean like the walls, the floor, the roof, and the windows, the barrier between inside and outside is designed so that it is stopping heat flow, both from a cooling and from a heating perspective. It's like a thermos flask or an esky. They're both exactly the same thing, just the temperature's different way round, basically. So it is doing that for you. It's, when you talk about passive with a small p, so passive solar design, that relies on lots of energy from the sun, heating up thermal mass, and then when the air temperature cools down, it releases the thermal mass again. So, and it relies on the inhabitant working windows and all sorts of things. And they can work, they absolutely can, but they rely on a lot of kind of people doing things. Whereas passive house, the building does it for you, basically, for a lot less energy. Yeah.
And you mentioned, obviously, because you went through the journey of doing it off your own house.
Oh, yes.
Was that
the grades to prove it?
Yeah. Point to yourself that this is possible, and they almost have like a case study to showcase people?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't my first thought. It was, at the end of the day, it was getting something that the kids would be healthy. And it's like when you start going down the rabbit hole of building performance, and I mean, I'm a designer, I'm an architect. I'm not a building scientist, but when you start learning about it, you're like, that makes sense. Oh, hang on, that makes sense. Oh, why didn't we do that already? And most people I talk to that kind of get into this area, builders and designers, they don't want to go back out again because once you know what you know it.
Well, what got you into it in the first place? Like, sorry if I missed that. Like,
no, it was just health basically. I mean, I studied
the health aspect.
I studied it a bit in uni,
right,
and learned about energy modelling and thermal bridging and moisture control and all sorts of things. And so it was always part of the work in the UK. When I came here, a lot of that isn't considered, to be perfectly honest, in the design process. But yeah, when the kids got getting sick, I was like, these buildings are not performing. They are not.
And lots of other people have had a similar experience.
Oh, without
clearly,
question.
There's gone all the way up to Parliament to try to solve.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what do you think of the Healthy Home Standards?
Do you want to hit a home run in your property journey?
Please like the episode, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and enjoy the show.
So I'm relatively agnostic. So I completely, I think Passive House is fantastic. I completely recognise that not everybody's ever going to get there. So I'm not black and white about it. I think it is an amazing end goal. But if somebody is struggling to heat and cool their house and they want to hang up some curtains that they think will help, I'm absolutely there to support them. I just want better for people, basically. So the Healthy Homes legislation helps. It definitely helps. But we have a big problem here around wanting to use less energy to heat and cool our buildings, but not considering the rest of the building holistically. So as we keep buildings warmer, we need to make sure we're adequately ventilating them as well. And we're just not. We're not at all. And there are other countries that have gone through this exact process. So Canada, about 30 or 40 years ago, I think it was during the energy crisis, kind of thought, well, if we add insulation, we don't have to spend as much money to heat our buildings, basically, because energy is becoming expensive as it is now here. But within sort of 5 or 10 years, their buildings are going rotten from the inside because we weren't ventilating them. If you don't have insulation, if moisture gets into your walls, it can dry out again, because there's a bit of airflow, that sort of thing, or air leaks, drafts. As soon as we add insulation, we're adding something that prevents that airflow and holds onto the moisture and can create moisture issues within the build-up. So Canada did this. Then they were, oh, crap, we need to start ventilating our buildings.
An unintended consequence.
Exactly, because we're not looking at the whole picture. So Canada did it. America did the same thing. England's done the same thing. It's our turn, basically. And I really wanted to leapfrog that. I wanted to get to the other end now and go, hang on a minute. If we are adding insulation, we are automatically making our buildings more airtight. We need to ventilate them properly.
So I think I'm blocking something here, but I want to hear your perspective, knowing what you know, seeing what the majority of, I guess, New Zealand is doing. What's the unintended consequence in 10 years' time as a result of the current legislation?
I mean, we're already seeing it. 40% of our houses are mouldy already. And this is existing buildings and new buildings.
And the Healthy Home Standards are not going to make that better.
They are enabling people they are helping people use less energy to heat their buildings, but they are not ventilating them. And so we are going to end up with quite a lot of issues. I mean, we have the highest levels of respiratory disease in the developed world in New Zealand because of the quality of our buildings.
So is there for someone who's in a healthy home and noticing, I guess that condensation, am I turning on a dehumidifier? Do I just have to be disciplined to open the windows in the morning when I go out to work? What would you recommend as a fix for maybe for someone who doesn't even own the home?
That is the difficult thing. And so Brands has done a study called HEAP 2, where they've monitored buildings for a year, basically.
Right.
They tried to get a full range of buildings around the country. They got minimum code, new, old, high performance, Passive House, Homestar, all sorts of things. They couldn't get a single rental property to agree to let them monitor the interior of the home.
Why not?
I would presume because they are scared of what will come out around the actual quality of the building that they are renting out to people, basically, which is quite sad when you think about it.
Totally.
So it's quite difficult. I mean, if you're in a rental property, you don't have control over the fabric. You need to be able to open your windows and get that moisture out as quickly as possible. Yeah. The problem is that means all your heat's going out in winter.
I'm in the privileged position to have a couple of rental properties, and I don't manage them myself anymore.
Yeah.
In the past, when I did, I tried to have a friendly chat with the occupants to say, hey, it's your home. At the same token, if you're not going to open the windows and take the moisture off, we're actually going to rot out the windowsills.
100%.
And I had to try and encourage them to do it. They were not consistent.
Well, this is, I mean,
it's frustrating for me as the owner because on my own, when I've been a tenant on my own home, I go through the discipline of doing that because I don't have a passive house. But I also understand that.
Well, I mean, this is another benefit from I talk about health and comfort, but it's all to do with energy. And that, that won't benefit you as the person owning the home, but it will benefit the person renting it. But durability and lower maintenance is a really big thing. Because if you're relying on people, God love them, you can't rely on people. But if you've got something doing it all the time in the background, you don't have to worry about it as much, So you've got a more durable building, less maintenance, no mold, no condensation. You don't have to repaint every time you get tenants in and out, et cetera, et cetera. And they're going to be healthier, so they're probably going to stay there longer. So you've got more consistent occupancy of the unit, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of begins to make a lot of sense when you start thinking about it in these kind of terms.
So Joe, obviously with a lot of these benefits that you've just mentioned now, why do you think the take-up of this is so slow in New Zealand?
I think there's a few different reasons, and a lot of it is perception, and that is you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
I mean, our middle child was 6 last week, a week before, sorry, and we had a birthday party for her, and we had a load of school friends around, and all the parents walked in, and as they walked, every single one, I went, God, it's really warm in here.
Yeah.
And then they kind of walked around, and you could see them kind of being like, and that feeling of the whole building just being comfortable. We don't have a heating system. We have 0 fixed heating. We don't have a cooling system. We've just got a well-designed building that's constantly ventilated. And they just were like,
So middle of winter, what's home temperature?
It'll be between 18 and 20 degrees with no heating.
And I can agree to that because, I mean, I had an opportunity to work on the passive homes, and that's where we met. And it was a couple of weeks ago, so it was quite cold outside. I walked in, and it was, 18 degrees, 19 degrees?
Yeah.
Literally had to take my jacket off. I think I interviewed you in your T-shirt.
Yeah.
I interviewed the vendor in his T-shirt, and I took the jacket off. I needed to be in the T-shirt.
I got to say, I know this made an impact on hearts because look who's on the show.
I mean, I've had the privilege of shooting a lot of houses, but that to me struck because I was like, I don't think I've heard of this concept as much.
But it's just different.
And it makes sense.
And you walk in and it's quiet.
Yeah. It's
because air tightness and good insulation and stuff is noise doesn't transfer. So it's
also
quiet.
Though I noticed you're both from the UK.
Yeah.
Most of my clients are from abroad because they kind of experience what it should be like to live in a house. And it's funny, I mean, so our house, we finished it 4 years ago. It's been in kind of various articles and magazines and all sorts of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of looking at the comments section of one of the online articles. Never do that. People online, wouldn't say what they say. But one person, so our house is, it was very low budget. So we built it 4 years ago on just under $500,000, basically, which comes into about 2,500 a square metre for a certified passive house. It considered prior.
Hang on just a second. 2,500 for a square metre.
Yep.
Date of build?
Date of the build. We finished it October 21.
This is in the middle of crazy...
all that crap. We've got less plywood on the shelves.
Do you know, I mean, you're working architecture now. I mean, building it today, how much would it cost, do you think?
Well, so construction material costs on their own have gone up about 40% in the past 4 years. So you wouldn't
put that in around 4,000 a square then now?
Yeah. So when I talk to my clients now, I say minimum 4,000 a square metre for a one-off architectural build. If you're going with like a developer build, obviously they've got supply chains. You're kind of talking sort of threes. I mean, metre square rates are horrible.
Totally.
Because exactly the same house with a $20,000 kitchen or a $100,000 kitchen throws it out completely, and it has no bearing on the quality or the performance or anything like that of the building, So it's a really difficult metric
to
talk about.
It's a horrible metric to use.
But it's the one we've got.
Is there a better one?
Not really.
I mean, so I'm interested to know, like, what's the is there a technical term for the shell in terms of what you're talking about?
You can try and split it up into things like that. I don't have those numbers to hand, but so our house is, it's got SIPs, so structurally insulated panels, which are basically cut to size in a factory. They come to the site and they go together like a Lego set really quickly. We left those exposed on the inside and just painted them rather than lining it. The interior walls are all plywood lined. It's Because we've got SIPs, the insulation is the roof slope. So we use all the roof space as well. So it's technically a 2-story building. It's got downstairs, it's got 2 bedrooms and a spare room, bathroom, toilet, laundry, big storage cupboard in the hallway, and a big open plan living, kitchen, dining space. Upstairs, it's got a mezzanine space, which is our office. It's got a walk-through wardrobe. It's got an ensuite, and it's got a massive master bedroom as well. It's got 2 big overhanging decks. I think it's like 50 square meters of covered deck on the outside.
I love the sound of your home.
We like it. It's a little red barn. We call it. But it's of its place, and that's what I quite like as well from a design perspective. But yeah, so essentially it's a 4-bedroom house for $500,000 including GST. And there's always the conversations around, yes, you're in the industry and all sorts of things. So I might have got some quite nice rates from suppliers and things, but even if you add 20%, it's still 3,000 a square meter. Because we considered it up front. I built the kitchen myself for some plywood. We went cheap on the bathrooms, but you can change a bathroom. You can't change your windows that easily. You can't add insulation to your walls without having to strip everything out. So it's kind of like prioritizing the things that will help the performance first, and then whatever can come later can be changed out or added on at a later date.
Just prioritizing the shell of it. That's
100%,
the most crucial part.
I mean, we got solar panels a year ago because we couldn't afford it up front. When we bought the panels, we wanted a battery, couldn't afford the battery, but we got the panels and we're paying those off so we can then afford. And it's just prioritizing and thinking about how you can make it work for you over time, sort of thing.
In bringing that design to fruition, and I feel like I know you're going to say not much, but I think the question that I would have is how much of a sacrifice do you have to make in terms of being able to get, the best house for the site in order to have a passive house that is the best it can be for the site? Is it a handicap?
I don't think it's, you do have to make compromises, but not necessarily sacrifices. So I do this kind of webinar basically, and I say kind of, how much this is this, and I've got a picture of a Flintstones car, and you say, this is a car. It's got kind of wheels, it's got seats, it's got a steering wheel. Yeah. If I want to make that car better,
well, here's no motor to start with.
I'm going to have to add things. I'm going to add an engine, add a windscreen, add brakes. I'm adding cost to that. But if I started, I went, what do I want the outcome to be? How am I going to start? I might make it slightly smaller, or I might make it slightly simpler form, or I might not use, tiling the bathroom. I might go with something else, which I can then change later if I want. So a lot of the time I say, what is your budget? Okay. And then you say, what do you want to fit into that budget? And if someone says a swimming pool and 15 bedrooms, then you kind of go, okay, well, if that's what you're aiming for, then that might not work, because if that's your priorities. But if somebody says, I want a 3-bedroom house, but I want it to be comfortable, I want it to be quite high performance, etc., you say, okay, cool. Well, this is the sphere that we're working in. Let's see what we can fit within that, rather than thinking about this and then adding on the performance, which of course is going to cost money because you're adding it. If you think about it from the start as part of the holistic design process, it doesn't necessarily have to cost more. I've got 4 projects on site at the moment, and one of them's down in like the Marlborough Sounds. And it's coming out at about the same per square meter rate, forgive me, as a standard home just down the road. And it's going to be fully passive house certified. Right. So yeah, it just...
And it's got no fireplace.
It's got no fireplace, doesn't
It's got no heat pump.
It does. So there's a bit of a misnomer that a passive house doesn't need heating and cooling.
It might, if it's in Antarctica.
Well, surely. It says to keep this house at 20 degrees, this is how much energy you will need. And how you add that is up to you. So you can sit at 18 degrees, as to be honest, we do. I don't mind being a little bit cooler. But if I wanted to keep it at 20 degrees, I know how much energy I need to add, sort of thing. So
is that easy to do, or you have to think of that?
We've got a $15 fan heater from Bunnings we pull out. And we've used it 3 days in the middle of winter in the morning for half an hour just to kind of bring that little temperature back up again, basically.
Right.
So yeah, it's a difficult thing about costs, because, and it comes a big conversation to every client about what do you want? And some people say, I want a 250 square meter house. And you go, okay, so what do you want in that house? Oh, I'd like, 3 bedrooms. Okay, how big do you want those bedrooms to be? How big is your bedroom at the moment?
And actually, that's a good question. Like, if you're having this conversation with a potential client, right, or your client you're working through, and you ask them that question, I just imagine going, well, I don't even know how big my bedroom currently is.
Yeah, so I usually tell people, go home, just measure it.
Yep.
And they might come back and say, okay, so it's 3.5 meters. I'd quite like another 0.5 meter for a bit more room for a wardrobe. Brilliant, cool. So let's start with these sizes of spaces you need to inhabit to live the way you want to live. And then let's kind of pull that together into a design, make sure the flow works, make sure you can kind of get connection to the spaces, add some fun and intrigue and little views and all sorts of things. And almost every single time, that building comes out smaller than they think it needs it to be.
Right.
But the problem with that is, property is profit and finances in the New Zealand market. We have a property market with a bit of agriculture tacked on, and that's our economy essentially a lot of the time. And so people think they want bigger houses for resale value and all sorts of bits and pieces. So it can be difficult. But yeah, if you kind of really assess what you want the outcomes to be, it doesn't necessarily have to cost more, because this is the whole picture.
Cost is one, and it's an important element.
Yeah.
The other one, I guess, is the form.
Yeah.
And,
keeping things simple, yeah. A corner costs about $2,500 on a building when you take into account material wastage, labour, flashings and trims and all sorts of things. So another one I've got is kind of a unnamed developer plan, which is kind of, a standard H shape, wardrobes poking out the wall, all sorts of funky roof forms and gables and all sorts of things. And it's got 37 corners. And you go, okay, so if I just simplify the form, do nothing else, just think about how I can simplify this. Don't change the square meter, don't really change the look of the building. And I got it from 37 down to 12 corners. So we saved whatever that was, $40,000. That's a ventilation system and better windows. And you haven't costed more. You've just weighed your decisions and considered where the budgets and the kind of the attention's going to go, really. So
if I'm if I'm a listener and a watcher out there, and I'm intrigued, where do I start?
Oh, you can come and talk to me. I like to talk a lot.
Yeah, that's good. How do they get in touch with you? What would be the process? Would it be to get you or someone involved as early as possible?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I would love to talk to anyone. As I said before, my aim is to help anyone that wants to do better, whether that's end goal or just on the pathway, basically. So yeah, I work with Homestar, with Passive House or anything else. I'm happy to talk to anybody that just wants to understand what a square meter is.
Homestar?
Yeah, Homestar. So Homestar is, the same, uses the same modelling as Passive House. Passive House is solely considering comfort and energy. Basically. Homestar looks at everything else around that. It looks at livability, healthy materials, water use, biodiversity, embodied carbon in a New Zealand context. And it's a rating system, basically. And I use them both together because Passive House does what it does really, really, really well. And Homestar does everything else really, really well as well, sort of thing. And it also helps with financial outcomes. So got to talk about finances. So our house got a 12% value increase from the valuers because it's Passive House and Homestar certified. If you're going for Homestar, you can get 0.75% off your mortgage rates with some banks if you're going to be Homestar rated. Developers can get green finance loans at a lower rates because of aiming for these targets. So from a financial perspective up front, there are benefits as well, sort of thing, as well as the lower energy use. And
I can't help thinking, and I don't know if it's an economic principle, but it's definitely a phenomenon that I've observed that when interest rates go down, house values go up. So if you're knocking 75 basis points off what it costs someone to own that home, I haven't got the chance to work it out, but it will be interesting to work it out later and see what the bump is potentially.
Yeah, so the New Zealand Green Building Council released a study a month or two ago about the value of getting Homestar certified, and they'd run these numbers, basically. And I think they said that if Homestar requires, if you took a house and made it achieve Homestar 6, the payback is 3 years on whatever premium on doing that is, basically.
Right.
And they've got several different companies doing all the numbers and all sorts of things. So,
do you mean in terms of the cost of doing that versus the cost of keeping it compared to a normal house? Essentially,
yeah. So yeah, if you took, and this is kind of the conversation of, I've taken an existing design and added on things to make it achieve that level.
Right,
so that's added me, that's costed me money. Yeah. But that, because of the savings around energy use and comfort and health and all sorts of things. It takes 3 years before that becomes a net positive, basically.
Yeah.
So
And it's great you mentioned about the developers as well, because what I wanted to ask you was this approach something almost like a standalone home, or can it be a developer where it's a couple of townhouses together?
100%.
Is the approach the same?
it's easier. It's easier for connected buildings because you've got less external wall and roof area. So like if I've got 2 standalone houses, I'm losing heat all the way around there. As soon as I do that, I'm not losing heat between those 2 bits of building. So I don't need to add as much insulation potentially. So it's actually easier for
And you're not getting overheating through them either. You know.
potentially, yeah, exactly. So in passive house, there are passive house swimming pools, passive house hospitals, schools. It's got passive house because the German was passive house,
Right.
but it's not for houses. It's for buildings, basically. So I used to do a bit of education work in my previous practice and designed a classroom block in Glenfield in Auckland. It was a Ministry of Education project, so I had a Ministry of Education budget. But I said at the start, I want this to be a really comfortable building, getting kids comfortable, enable them to learn, enabling the teachers to actually spend more time teaching them is so important. So simpler design, made sure it was completely consistent insulation, thermally broken everything, fully balanced mechanical ventilation system, fully ducted heating and cooling system. That project came in under budget and it came in a month early, basically.
Nice.
And the teachers say it's the most comfortable building they've ever taught in.
And I can't help but being curious. Open plan classrooms? Or?
It did have ILE classrooms, yeah, because it was. I know they've changed that now, haven't they? Yeah, but even that around acoustics, because it's fully ventilated and more airtight. You don't have to open the windows next to the main road. You can have more acoustic treatments internally, etc., etc. So there's lots of things that all just start working better once you start thinking about these performance considerations up front, really.
And Joe, like when obviously, let's say I'm keen and I'm on board with the idea, what are the significant milestones that you would have throughout the journey until the point the house is ready?
Yeah, so the earlier the better. I mean, as we say, if you've already got a design, and so the process is to model it.
Yeah.
Model it first. Whatever stage you're at, get it modeled, because you just don't know until you've got that information and that confidence. Obviously, if you've already got a design and you model it, if it turns out things need to change, that's going to cost money for rework and all sorts of things. So the sooner the better. So getting a designer that kind of understands that sort of concept around modelled performance is really important. And there are some incredible, we have some of the most beautiful buildings on the planet in this country. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to perform very well. So just getting somebody on board early that kind of really understands that. If that's not the designer, get a consultant in. Modelling a simple standalone home. I mean, you're probably talking sort of maybe $2,000 to do an energy model and a full report saying this is how the building's performing. These are where the weak points are. And these are the recommendations we make. And a lot of the time, that fee is absorbed through not having to have as much insulation because you've rebalanced it, etc., etc. So just model it, basically. And then you have the instruction booklet on how to achieve the outcomes you want, basically.
Mate, talk us through your build project, because I feel like, and we've been lucky to have architects on the show and spend time talking about that design phase. But I don't think I've talked to any of them who have, I think listening to you talk about going through your build project, it was one that was necessitated by your family situation, driven by your passion for the idea of incorporating that passive house design. But then also you, like I'm sure most people embarking on that sort of journey, you had to work with a strict budget. So, and you did it through COVID times.
Yes.
I'd love to hear you tell us the story of that and what you learned and what worked better than you thought, and what would you go, shoot, if I was doing that again and knowing what I know now.
There's a light switch in the wrong place, I'll tell you that for a fact.
There's a light switch in the wrong.
It's really annoying.
I'm really interested to know about your journey going through a build, because I've talked to other architects, but it's quite different to get the lens of going through that phase. And knowing that, if I recall correctly, you did this through the COVID era, so there would have been some bumps, I'm sure. But what did you learn from that? What went exactly as you expected, and what are the things that you know now that maybe you've been able to incorporate into your practice?
100%. I mean, it's a real privilege. I mean, there's not many architects that manage to build their own house.
Hey, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Quick interruption and request. Please like and subscribe, and don't be too Kiwi about it. If there's a question you've asked or if we've done something silly, let us know in the comments, share it with a friend. Now back to the content.
And it's like builders always live in kind of building sites, and architects always live in crap houses a lot of the time unless they get the chance to design it. So when we started looking at our journey to getting a healthier building for our family, designing and building our own house wasn't the first port of call. We were first thought, shall we buy something and renovate it? But a lot of my work was around, renovation and weather tightness issues and also, and like, it can be an absolute minefield. And with the size of our budget, it just wasn't a goer at all. So then we started talking to kind of, relocatable house companies and prefab people, and kind of said, could we get one of these, but could we have a ventilation system and some slightly better windows? And that's not what we do. That's not our product. Which, fine. So we eventually realized if we wanted to get the outcomes we wanted, we'd have to design our own building, basically. And then you go for that exciting, terrifying, interesting process of like, what do we want? What do we want to live in? How do we want to live? What spaces do we need? How soundproof do we want the kids' rooms? Do you want a separate toilet or do you want it included in the bathroom? And all these decisions. And it's great fun. It's part of the fun process, basically. All being in mind, we did not have very much money at all, basically. And when I say not very much money, we got my grandma, one of my grandmas in the UK died and gave us a little bit of cash. And so we had essentially a 5% deposit for what we were looking at. So we, first of all, had to get land because, you can't really design a building until you've got somewhere to put it on, to think about views, orientation, all sorts of things. So we wanted to be no more than an hour from work. When I was living in London, I was 2 trains and 2 hours to work and back, and it was absolutely horrific. So, that was quite key.
Detested that.
So we were looking at sections north of Auckland. I found this amazing little hillside in Te Akaroa, which is about 45 minutes up near Silverdale and Puhoi and stuff like that, and just fell for it. Like, this amazing panoramic river valley view and all sorts of things. So I thought, great, that works for us. So then it was the process of designing it. I like buildings of their place, and it's very rural, so kind of a rural barn form. I ended up going with kind of rusty red, similar to sort of the nice, rural infrastructure you see kind of settling in the fields and stuff. So then it was looking at, designing the spaces. At the time, we only had 2 kids. We didn't really know if we wanted 3 or not, and then we decided to halfway through. So thank God I made enough bedrooms, and just kind of trying to balance what we wanted with realistic expectations of sizes and all sorts of things, and considering the performance, thinking about it's a sloping site, so it would have cost more for a concrete slab because we've had to do excavation and fill. So kind of a timber floor with piles makes sense, and thinking about all these bits, but also joy and beauty. And I really like castles, but when you're in an old castle and you're in the big dining hall and you see these little windows up here, and it just creates that sense of, there's something else, that intrigue, that interest, that view through, that kind of moment of joy. So kind of incorporating all that into the design of the building. So Lower Saddle Passive House is what it's called. It's 100 square meters on plan, which is pretty small from New Zealand considerations. And then because we've got the upstairs as well, there's another 60 odd meters squared up there. Right. But to make it feel bigger, and people walk in and say it's like a TARDIS, because you walk in and then we've got a lowish ceiling in the hallway, and then it goes to a full height vaulted ceiling in the living space. And that playing with levels can really make spaces feel more interesting. And then we've got those views through. So suddenly you think, there's another space in there, there's another space in there. And it begins to kind of play with your perception of space to make it feel bigger. And as I say, we've got 3 kids and we live in there perfectly happy. We had my family over from the UK over Christmas. So we had 10 people living in that house over Christmas. It worked. I was really impressed. My dad got in the tent a couple of times because he needed a break, but it just worked basically. So we designed this building, and then we kind of said, right, we need to see what the budget's going to be. So we went to a builder that I worked with quite a lot, and they kind of said, it's going to be quite tight. So our budget at the time was 375,000 basically to build this house. And this guy went, good friend actually, kind of said, that's going to be really tight, but we will definitely see what we can make it work. So based on that, we signed on the dotted line for the land, which was, what was it? 395, I think, for 3.5 acres of kind of land doing that basically. So we signed on the dotted line, bought the land. 6 weeks later, this poor guy came back and said, priced it. It's come out of 750. And we were like, "Oh, what are you doing? We've bought this now. We've bought it now. What are we going to do?"
It's stressful.
Bloody.
Yeah, we drank a lot of wine. But we kind of thought, right, we are at the point now, we've got to do something. So what are we going to do? So that became that kind of process of prioritizing. So not losing out, but thinking how do we bring down the upfront cost to help us achieve this with what can come later, basically. So went through that whole process of kind of reducing, stripping out, thinking about finishes, thinking about the size didn't change at all. It was just down to specifications, finishes, and what was included and excluded, basically. So we managed to get
when
the
you
budget.
say specifications,
So finishes. So kind of, flooring. As I said earlier, we've just painted the SIPs instead of lining them. So we took that out. Type of cladding. I wanted really nice shingles and all sorts of things. That was never going to happen in our budget. So we went with board and batten plywood in the end, which kind of fits quite well in the aesthetic anyway. Went to plastic water tanks instead of concrete tanks.
I think for a moment you were going to say corrugated iron, given there was a barn-inspired.
Yeah, we did look at metal at one point, but even that, the product and the install is relatively low cost, but flashings around window cost more because there's lots of folding to do and all sorts of things. So going through this real kind of process of iterative, how can we refine this and refine this and refine this more sort of thing. So we finally pulled it down, and then we got 3 builders to price. As I said before, they came out $100,000 difference on exactly the same drawings.
Oh, wow.
But went with a builder, Kane Build Group in Takapuna. They did we could not have done that without them.
Right.
And those relationships in a project are so key for designer, client, and builder. That group need to get along and need to trust each other from the start. So getting them all incorporated is really important.
And just on that, before we move on, with the builders, so why was the cost so different? Was it because the builders are also not used to this concept?
Potentially. I mean, that's the problem. It's like the word wedding. You go to a venue, say wedding, suddenly it costs twice as much. As soon as you say we're looking to do a cheap passive house, they had risk. They had unknowns because a lot of them might not have done it before, and these guys have before. But also,
so was it the unknowns that drove the cost up?
Potentially, but also you have to understand when a builder gets a set of drawings, they are seeing those drawings for the first time. And I mean, I pride myself, to be honest, on having quite a good set of drawings. But then those drawings go off to all the different sub-consultants and the plumber and the electrician and the painter and the concrete guy and all these. And, that person there might live further away, so has a higher mileage rate than this person over here, and that person over there might not need the work, so price a bit higher. And, it's such a complex picture. And then they all come back, and so that person, that builder there might have had these subbies over here that all were a little bit higher than these subbies over here. And then it's just, it's such a complicated picture that you're never going to get exactly the same price from several different builders, but that was a lot more different than I thought it was going to be, to be honest.
You also talked about that importance of getting them client, designer and builder in together. What advice would you give people on creating that?
Good relationships. Like, trust your gut a little bit as well. I mean, there's clients that I've not worked with because I don't think it's going to work. There's builders I love to work with and I consider them. I was in a hot tub with one of them a little bit recently because we're really good mates now, But it's relationships, and building a house is one of the most stressful things you will ever do for all parties because everybody's got something on the line, reputation, company, build, finances, etc., etc. So, and there can be opportunities or instances of the blame game or thinking somebody else isn't in it as much as them. That builder wants to get that house built as much as you want to get it built. They're not just there to try and take you for a song. They hopefully anyway, so they're on your side. So let's all just work together as well as we can. And the earlier you can get involved, the better, basically.
So if I'm a client, and am I more relying on the designer and the builder to have that relationship between them, that if I come in new, I'm kind of going, I really like the designer. And I'm relying on the designer to really recommend me a good builder because they sort of understand each other.
It comes in all sorts of ways.
They understand my concept.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely helps. So there's several builders that I work with, consistently because they're great and we know how each other works. Like there's Fairfield Construction down in Blenheim. I love working with those guys because we're on the same page. But I'm open to kind of talking to anyone. if I was doing a high performance project or a passive house project and the builder was like, oh yeah, no, yeah, it'll be right,
That
I might kind of, I might be like, hang on a minute. Do you, you're really kind of in for this, etc., etc.
So do you find yourself you're also in process with the newer builders that you're also educating them in the process of
and
this?
it's great, to be honest. I mean, I think there's only one passive house project I've done with a certified passive house builder, two, working on the second one at the moment. Everybody else has been just wanting to know how they can do better and learn about it. And so when we did our house, Kane had done SIPs before, they'd never done passive house. So they priced it and it worked. And aside from that, because our budget was so low, one of the cost cutting or cost management areas was only do accommodation on the ground floor. And the upstairs was just storage, so we were going to extend into there later. But we signed a contract with Kane, went to the bank because we had a very, very low deposit. Essentially, we had a 10% deposit when we bought the land, which turned into 5% over the house and the land together. And so the bank said, we need a valuation of this before we'll lend you any money for it, basically. And then when they valued it, they said, it's only a single story house on a big rural section. It's not big enough. It's not going to be worth what you're saying it's going to cost to build. You need to make it worth more.
On paper. So we had to add in another bathroom and bedroom, which we wanted to do eventually, but we're trying to avoid upfront cost, to make it a 4-bed 2-bath, because then on paper it was worth more, which still boggles my mind. So that was another iterative kind of crap. How are we going to add this without increasing the cost? So again, working with Kane really closely, which is why I say we couldn't have done it without them, because we had to go through this whole process with them. But we made it work incredibly. So we were going to start in March 2020. It was good timing. And then, COVID hit. So I ended up doing my passive house designer certification kind of online in our little granny flat in Murray's Bay in, middle of winter with 2 kids screaming at me, all sorts of things. And then we started in October 21.
Wow.
Then we had all the material shortages. And so, the plywood linings on our walls were the last they could find on the shelves. So we had to go to 3 different placemakers and all sorts of things. So the build itself was all fraught and all sorts of things. But it finished May 21, so 7 months. And I took all of my annual leave to be on site with the builders, basically, because the opportunity to see my drawings translated into a real thing, I didn't want to miss, and it was invaluable to see it from the builder's perspective, because if I draw on a bolt connection here or something like that, and then I get to site and the builder's like, how the hell am I supposed to fit this in? You go, oh crap. God, that's a good point, actually. Because when you're looking at something 2D, so that informs every single project I design now. How is this going to be built physically? How is this going to fit? I model everything in 3D. Every junction is considered, because I want to know that they can put it together without having to add complexity and cost and difficulties on site, which again, that's time, etc., etc. And it was great. I mean, I think I know the crap out of them being on site all the time, but for me, it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
No, I could see how much you took out of that experience.
100%.
It's interesting. So I work with a lot of real estate agents, and it's certainly been said that it would be helpful for a real estate agent to have to sell their own home every few years. Just to have that real empathy and understanding what it's like to be the client.
Absolutely.
But I feel like it must be the same thing for architects. Pretty helpful to have to build your own, to go through that process.
I absolutely, and I advocate for any designer to get on site, basically, because you need to understand what you're drawing. If you don't, then it just adds complexity. And so we need to front load more decisions and kind of think about things earlier. And then when we get to site, you've already thought about it. The builder doesn't have to work it out, the poor guy, and pick up the phone and saying, your design doesn't work, or anything stupid like that, So building it was just incredible. And monitoring it ever since it's completed is just the whole part of the picture, because our building code is performance based. Everything we put into that building, you have to test it to make sure it'll do what it's supposed to do. But then once it's built, it's just abandoned, and whatever happens. We need to be seeing if we're actually achieving what we're setting out to achieve, and that comes down to kind of the blower door testing, and it comes down to the monitoring, and passive house just works basically. So
And it's great that you've sort of practiced what you preach in a way through your own build process, which is fantastic. So Joe, tell me, if So passive house is only attainable from scratch. What if I have a house?
No, not at all. So passive house for existing buildings.
Yeah.
There's a retrofit approach called Enerfit,
Right.
which uses the same model and allows you to either say, I want to do all this at once, and this is how I'm going to achieve the outcomes, or it says, right, first do this, then do this, then do this. But because you've done the model and you know what the end goal is, you know that each of these decisions you're making along the way are going to get to that end goal.
Right.
Rather than panicking, going, oh crap, I better put the best windows I can afford in.
Yeah.
You might not need those, as long as you put a good ventilation and your gap ceiling, for example. You know, so
it's assessing the like modeling around the current building, assessing what the stages are, and then kind of going through.
So the modeling is just, so around the compliance, the schedule methods getting removed, which is where they said, are this in the ceiling, are this in the floor, all sorts of things. So modeling is going to become more mainstream. But modeling just gives you the instruction book on how to achieve the outcomes you want, basically. So when you're modeling an existing building, you can find out what the weak point is. And sometimes it's pretty obvious, if it's overheating because you've got massive west glazing, you kind of know what the problem is, sort of thing, but sometimes you might not. And you also don't know what impact your decision is going to have. So if I just changed all that west glazing for really good low E coating, suddenly I might be really cold in winter because I actually needed some of that heat. So you need to kind of have that instruction book to make sure you're making the right decisions and understanding what the impact of that is holistically.
We've managed to make it all the way back to low E.
Yes, sorry, low E, yeah. So low E is it's a coating on the glass, on one side of the glass. It's usually sort of a silver nitrate, and it prevents a certain percentage of the UV radiation, which is what produces heat, from passing through the glass. So it doesn't impact the visible light spectrum.
So what's the difference between that and a tint?
A tint is a colour. And that prevents the visible light as well,
right?
Basically, so a low E coating
doesn't affect the light, but it does affect the heat.
Correct. Yeah. So you won't be able to tell there's a low E coating until you get down to like 30 odd %. And what that means is only 30% of the UV can get through. Most low E coatings are sort of 50%, so only half the UV radiation can get through, and that's great for avoiding overheating. But you might need that in winter, So it's always a balance, and this decision will impact several different things. Sorry.
No, that's great.
This is great.
I'm glad I got to get there. Thank you.
This is fantastic, Joe. It's fascinating to just hear about all of this, because the first time we met, I was bowled by the information, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe. And being from UK as well, I could see the differentiator in terms of the housing quality in general. And it's just fantastic to hear what passive home can do for your everyday living. Where do you see it? Do you see the adaptability being in New Zealand? Where do you see it, like where people will start considering it almost like a no-brainer? How far do you see that sort of happening?
I would say, and this is not a positive, but COVID kind of helped a bit. Because people were stuck in their houses for so long and realised how bad they are a lot of the time when they're in that space for such a long period of time. A lot of the time they would have been going out to their offices, which were air conditioned and all sorts of things. But because we've been stuck in our houses for so long, people began to realise, hang on a minute, this isn't great actually. So that kind of began making people consider, hang on, what's uncomfortable about this? And people have always thought about what's uncomfortable, but a lot of the time they'll just kind of turn on the heat pump if they've got one, etc., etc. But now energy is getting more expensive again. So that's not really an answer. And, we've got a change in climate. Things are going to get hotter. We're going to have overheating issues going forward. We need to consider that more. So the building code was on a pathway. And a really well set out pathway called Building for Climate Change, which had an end goal in 2030 or 2035, which was passive house levels of performance. Right. So that was where all of our building code changes were aiming for, basically. Then the current government got in and decided to change that, basically. which I do not agree with.
It's an interesting one though, because whilst I'm loving the conversation, I think this is it's a no-brainer, and definitely with that perspective of having seen how homes can be in other countries is a different standard. You know, it might be way colder outside, but nobody's cold. You come to New Zealand, it's not that cold outside, and it's cold. Well, you shivering, right?
So I've just hired somebody actually, and she's from Hungary, and she we did a chat a little while ago, and she said she's never been as cold as she's been in New Zealand. Like, she'd go for a run at -1 down the river in Hungary, and she's colder here because you can't get warm. That's true. Like, I used to love winter. Like back in Yorkshire, it used to be, snowing days. We go for a walk in the Dales, go back home to home or a pub, a nice warm pub or something. And you walk in, it's warm, really comfortable, and that's great. But when we, the first house we lived in New Zealand was a lovely lady in Grey Lynn, overlooking Western Springs Park. And house was really cool, really old villa. In winter, it got so cold and wet, you could see glowworms living in the roof void through this little ventilation grill in our bedroom ceiling. Wow. And you just couldn't get warm, and it's miserable. Yeah. It's miserable,
No admission fee to see the glowworms.
No, it's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, screw you.
I mean, to be fair, it's really into the spectrum, it gets quite... But I guess the other part to that is, like, the amount of frustration I've heard from builders, architects, developers, the homeowners, and then the recipients at the other end of this is actually the amount of red tape and the bureaucratic process to actually get a home built is overbearing. So on one hand, the aims perhaps that were there were really good, but the process of getting them was too clunky. And maybe not everyone shares my perspective, but the amount of people that I've talked to who have just said it's horrendous. The request for information, the council's approach is, we're looking for problems. And then they'll find a problem that doesn't actually exist, spend 2 weeks where an engineer has to basically try and convince them that's right. And then they go, oh, actually you were right. And just back to that.
I mean, on our house, we, the guy doing the building consented officer came back and said, I want a full hot and cold water schematic. I said, you don't need, that's not part of the consent process. I said, I want it. And I said, no, but why do I have to provide it? Oh, I used to be a plumber. I said, no, I don't have to provide that. But on the flip side of that, one of my projects recently went through in 17 days, and the worst RFI was, I can't read the engineer's handwriting. So like it's...
And that's probably a valid concern.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so if there's definitely a conversation around compliance, red tape, whatever you want to call it. I will say there's definitely an argument that the removal of red tape ended up in the leaky building crisis. And we are quite likely on the pathway to that sort of issue again.
This is what I want your perspective, given existing, it's clearly not fit for purpose, and you're frustrated with it because also now it's not going where it should be going. So from your perspective, what's the path forward?
Changing towards performance-based outcomes. Basically, so rather than a compliance outcome, a performance outcome, so saying, as designers, you need to prove that your building will use this much energy. And whether that's passive house or whatever, we need to kind of just have an actual aim, a measurable aim.
And how does it speed up the consenting?
So that's around the performance side of things.
Would that speed it up, using performance as opposed to the current?
There have been conversations around recognizing that Homestar and passive house result in much better outcomes, and so they could be compliant, deemed to comply pathways, which definitely help from a consenting perspective. Maybe they could have a shorter consenting timeline, because you say, I'm going for the passive house certification. This requires really high level of third-party QA, and so the consenting officer can say, okay, I don't need to worry about thermal performance. I don't need to worry about durability because there's less moisture risk and all sorts of things. So I don't have to worry about those areas. That's already part of the process. Around the whole compliance thing, I mean, it's just education, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. And, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and a builder came up to me and said, well, you don't need Homestar. The buildings are warm enough. So it's not just about warm. It's about moisture. It's about ventilation. It's about, are they cool enough? Yeah. It's all this kind of holistic picture of it. And when you begin to understand those sorts of things, it's not that difficult, really. It's just make your insulation continuous so you don't have any holes. Maintain good air tightness so you don't have any leaks. Model your building so you know that your glass is working well. Provide continuous ventilation. And if you're doing all those things, they automatically end up with more comfort, more durability, less maintenance, more health. They just work, they just do it, sort of thing. And so if we begin to recognize those sorts of things within compliance pathways, for example, that could hopefully simplify things a little bit. But it takes education from all points, from designers, from builders, from developers, from government. I mean, I met Chris Bank a couple of times and handed him a copy of the Homestar Design Guide, which he took home and said he read. So, we kind of, we are working on it. But it takes time. And New Zealand's great because it's relatively small, but it's quite difficult to make changes. But once those changes take hold, it kind of does that sort of thing. Yeah. So, and it feels like we might be beginning to get there. To be honest,
that's good.
When I set my company up September last year, nothing like setting up a company in the middle of a recession with a mortgage and 3 kids.
Well, you built a house in COVID.
Well, yeah, so might as well make life hard for myself, basically. Yeah,
it's like when others zag.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, but within about a month, I had 5 new houses on the books.
Oh, great.
And it's only continued. So I've just hired somebody. So I was 1, we're now 3. My wife's left her job. She's come on to help with like admin and accounts and all sorts of things. So we're a family company and all sorts of things.
Fantastic.
And people just seem to want it, which is great.
This is fantastic. And I feel like it's information that's very refreshing. And it's one that probably needs to be out there a lot more than it has been.
But it's a difficult thing because it can get so complicated and people can turn off really easily. People don't want to hear about kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. They want to hear about stories and comfort and drying your washing inside. And that's what I try and communicate is it's not necessarily about these certifications or these tick boxes or these numbers. It's about how do you want to live? Do you want to have a healthy life? Do you want to have a good, healthy family? Do you want to be happier? Do you want to sleep better? All these sorts of things. And it just, I just want to tell our story, because it's cool and it works.
Oh, fantastic.
Joe, thank you for coming on and telling your story. And I've got to say, you've been an open book. I love how you've shared so candidly. And it's a really interesting thing. I am very excited to watch both where you and your business go and, of course, what other momentum gathers behind this. Thank you so much.
Cool. No, thank you very much for listening to me. Appreciate it.
Joe, thank you so much. Thank you for coming to Home Run. Hopefully this is an insight for all our listeners. And I'm sure if you guys have any questions, just leave a note in the comments below and then we'll pass that on to you.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure that your contact details are on our screen as well. So that
always happy to have a coffee or a chat.
Fantastic.
Outstanding. Thanks, Joe.
Champion.
Look, this is Home Run Podcast, man. This is the big deal right here. Although, to be fair, you wouldn't know based on our subscriber and likes and comments, basically non-existent, by the way, at this point. We are still at the beginning of our podcast journey. And actually, jokes aside, it would mean the world to us if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment, share it with a friend. Helps us know that we're making a difference. And to be fair, it's good for the ego.
Yeah, whatever he said, make sure you do it because that will help my ego too.
Absolute muffins. He's too humble. He's too humble.
Man.
You must be proud of what we're doing here.
I'm incredibly proud of what we're doing. But I just don't know. I've never gone into this cycle of always, I've never asked for help.
Yeah, you've never needed the validation.
I'm always giving.
Yeah.
I feel very awkward even if someone comes to me and says, what you've done is a great job. And I'm like, I just don't know how to receive. That's my biggest problem.
Mate, let me bless you with this. You have done an incredible job with this podcast in terms of the production quality. Seriously, I love watching podcasts. And do you know what? I'm a bit Kiwi. In the past, I've just been a lurker. I've listened to the content. I've enjoyed it. I've literally got a lot out of it. And they would have no knowledge. It's probably only more recently when I've actually understood the impact on creators of having that engagement, to be able to go to a sponsor, to be able to go to another guest, that having those metrics actually matter for the creators. So please, do us a favor. We're at the beginning of our podcast journey. If you'd like to help us, if the content's been useful to you in some small way, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend. It would mean the world to us.
Whatever he said.